Hello again. So, this is the third series of conversations that I've been having lately with a fabulous author of a book. Mark, can you please put it up? It's called, we always do this, it's
Yeah,
called
cool.
Spies, Bombs, and Beyond, a walking history of Washington, D.C.'s Tenleytown. So, Mark Fitzpatrick, the author, this is not his first rodeo, was 26 years in diplomacy. And when he retired from that, he went to the International Institute for Strategic Studies based in London and wrote 10 books on nuclear dangers. And when he retired from that, he became a cruise ship lecturer. And like I say, every time I'm having a conversation with him, if you run into him, you will definitely thoroughly enjoy what he has to say. So hopefully you'll find him again once all this unusual time is over in another cruise. For now, the interesting part is I'm doing a little recap today. This book, it comes out of walking, this new thing that we all did and we still are doing, during these unusual times. So today we have a very, very interesting array of properties that I want him to address. So without further ado, Mark Fitzpatrick. Mark, how are you?
Hey, good. Thanks very much. And yes, I am still walking. One of my neighbors who read my book and told me about a house that she used to live on at Tilden in Reno, and she said it still has a stone pillar which has the vineyard, which where the father of America's vineyards grew grapes in the beginning of the U.S. United States of America. I didn't put that in my book, but if I do an update, I'm going to.
Please do, please do. So, we are dealing, well, before I move forward, I want you all to subscribe. You'll get Mark Fitzpatrick information in addition to markfitzpatrickwrote.com. So I'm going to put that in there because I want you to visit his website. And of course, subscribe and make comments and ask questions. This, in addition to being informative, we would like to hear from you. So this being Black History Month, I wanted to start off with a property that sort of shocked me when I read your book, because you said that it sits at the highest point, highest elevation of Washington, D.C. I always thought the Russian embassy sat at the highest elevation. At least that's what the rumor used to be. So what can you tell us about Fort Reno?
Yeah, so during the U.S. Civil War, the Union constructed 68 forts circling the capital to protect it against the rebel forces, which weren't that far away.
Mm-hmm.
Only one time did the rebels get close, when they actually attacked it from the south, and Fort Stevens was involved in that. But the biggest fort was at Reno. So it's called Fort Reno, which is the highest elevation in the city. The Russian embassy has a clear view of the White House, but
okay, now I know.
So during the Civil War, the forts, and particularly Fort Reno, attracted a lot of former enslaved people and some freed Black Americans as well. Living near the fort provided them some protection against the Confederates, who were still trying to seize any African American, free or not, and take back to the South. And they also found employment by living next to the fort. The Union forces used their labor, paid them. So a Black community grew up next to Fort Reno. After the war, the fort was taken down. The place where the fort was devoted to a water reservoir. We talked about one of the reservoirs last time.
Right.
And you can see this very nice, beautiful water tower, which is Tenleytown's most distinctive. And then next to where Fort Reno was is this community called Reno City. And this city was a thriving, integrated community. It had a lot of middle-class Blacks were living there. It had 3 Black churches, a Black Masonic lodge, a Black school. And so it was a good community, but it got taken apart. It got erased. And this is part of America's shameful history, I'm sorry to say. It didn't just happen.
It is.
Throughout the country. So when the streetcar line came up Wisconsin Avenue, and people were able to develop Tenleytown area, for residents who could then work in the city, the developers eyed this high level ground at Reno city and wanted to get rid of the Black residents. They said so explicitly. I mean, racism was nothing to be ashamed of back then, apparently.
Right, unfortunately.
One developer said, the colored folks will have to scatter. So disgraceful, really. 350 families were moved out. Their properties were condemned. And then redeveloped. I mean, now there's a large park there, Reno Park, where the Black community was, and actually Woodrow Wilson School was part of the Black community.
Right.
So the Alice Deal Middle School, and then the school, the last remaining structure. Actually, there are a couple houses that are still remaining on Nebraska Avenue from the Black community, but the best structure that remains is the Jesse Reno School, which was opened in 1903, served the Black children as a grade school. And it was Black children continued to go there until about the 1950s when their houses were just totally destroyed.
That was I think the part that was to me the most disturbing. And you said it right. Racism was par for the course, and the way they were exported, the way their land was taken away, amazing.
And no provision made for where they would go. And just by the one last thing, in Washington, D.C., Reno City was not the only Black community that was erased. When highways were put through the southwest part of D.C., they just went right through Black minority communities, destroying them. And that happened throughout the United States with these federal highways. They were purposely put to get rid of Black communities.
So yeah, that really. So that's why I wanted to start with that, and then it's going to be an interesting conversation today because we're going to talk about other communities that weren't exactly. Where we weren't exactly looking. We frowned upon them, or they were banned from living here. But before we go there, I would like to talk about fire stations and the call boxes.
Okay.
And before we go to the fire station and the call boxes, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Walking through Georgetown and different parts of the city, have you noticed stars on the buildings?
Stars on the buildings.
Yeah. So.
Tell me about that.
And it has to do with the fire stations. Getting rid of fires was destined for private enterprises. So you signed up like we do for an alarm system with a specific fire station. And in order for them to know which one you were signed up for, there was a star put on the side of your home. Or in a place visible for them to know that, okay, so this is John's service instead of Todd's service. So I just wanted to plug that in there. We got to do a little research about that.
Yes,
but,
indeed.
Before we got into talking about the fire station and of course the call boxes. So go ahead.
Writing about the fire station and the call boxes was a bit of an indulgence for me. Most of my stories are a little bit more historical and a little bit more heavier, or they have some kind of national connection. Fire station number 20 at 4300 Wisconsin Avenue. It's an interesting, quaint, beautiful fire station, but it doesn't have any national connection. But I had to write about it because fire stations are so important in my family because I've got two grandchildren. And my grandsons love fire engines. Of course, right? They hear a fire engine and they go, they run out and want to see it. So I had to write about fire station number 20, which is the second oldest fire station in use still in Washington, D.C. It's off in the early 1900s with horse-drawn buggies. Picture in my book of one of these horse-drawn buggies. And then in 1920s, the horses were replaced by engines. So they had modern fire, hook and ladder trucks, and they built a new bay for these larger trucks. And the community the home developers bragged about how safe Tenleytown was because they had this modern fire station, able to put out fires at night.
Well, to me, I like the fact that you included it because, as a realtor, I like structure. And so to me, it's that part of the architecture, et cetera. And when you incorporate to that the call boxes, these cast iron structures, it's also, an architectural feature that I like that you plugged in there.
Okay, so let's just word about the fire, the call boxes, fire and police call boxes. Call boxes first came to my attention again through my grandsons when reading their favorite book, Richard Scarry's Busiest Firefighters Ever, a little golden book. There's a story about Mr. Frumble sees what he thinks is a fire, and he pulls the alarm and the firebox, and the firefighters rush there. And what's this call box? And then I noticed in my neighborhood, there's call boxes all over the place. So I never realized it before because they got taken out of commission in the 1970s, I guess, when the 911 emergency call system was put in place. With 911, everybody could call the fire station directly from their home. But before that, you had to run to a fire call box and pull the lever, and it operated by a telegraph system. It notified the fire department, and then there were a smaller number of police boxes that operated in a similar fashion, but mainly the police boxes were for the use of police officers when they were on duty and they needed help. They could go to the nearest police box and call the station and summon reinforcements, as it were. So these call boxes, 700 of them have been renovated as part of a Washington, D.C. Art on Call program that started at, I think, around 2000. And in Tenleytown, 11 of these call boxes have been refurbished, repainted, and they've got watercolors by Lena Fruman about old buildings in Tenleytown. Neighborhoods of DC feature other things, and I take to looking at them wherever I go because they're very nice.
I like them, and in my neighborhood in Spring Valley, you put books in them. So if you want, if people put books in them, you take it out, you read it at home, and you put it back. So I thought it was a very interesting use until they come, because it's restoring these cast iron call boxes, it's an effort. So I've seen several in my neighborhood that are not perfectly restored, but at least they're useful for that. They have a new use. Okay, so moving on, why don't we go to my favorite deli? Let's talk about Wagshaws.
Wagshaws. I love Wagshaws too. It's a close walk from my house. It was close to the residents of Spring Valley, and the irony here is that Spring Valley excluded Jews. They had housing covenants which were kind of common back in the middle.
The same thing with Georgetown.
I mean, even in Tenleytown had them too. I mean, they excluded. They had a written line: no members of the Semitic race, and they would say Jews and Persians and Armenians and so forth. And so Jews were excluded from Spring Valley, but people in Spring Valley liked to go across the street with Mass Ave to Wagshaws Deli. It was very popular. Wagshaws moved to where it is right now in let me just check this, in 1939.
That was downtown, no?
It was downtown before that. It started in 1925 at 9th and G Street Northwest.
Mhm.
And but in 1939, it moved to the Spring Valley Shopping Center on Mass Ave. And a couple of interesting things about the Wagshaws Deli is that it has the oldest liquor license in DC.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought
Yeah,
Ace
and why is
Beverages
that?
on. Yeah, this is interesting.
Why is that? Well, it's because Sam Wagshaw, the founder of Wagshaws Deli,
Mhm.
was the first in line to apply for a liquor license after Prohibition was lifted.
Wow.
First one. And I assume it's on the wall somewhere, but I haven't seen it. And the second fun fact about Wagshaws Deli is that the nickname is the President's Deli.
Mm-hmm.
So many presidents frequented it. Harry Truman, George H.W. Bush, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Bill Clinton, they all like to go to Wagshaws Deli.
Mm-hmm.
And the one who liked it the most, or it was or Wagshaws liked the most, was Papa Bush, H.W. Bush, because he was so humble. He would queue up to buy stuff. He wouldn't send aides in to get it for him while he waited in the car. He'd go into the store and not go to the front line. He'd queue up. And
Yep.
waiting in line is part of the charm of Wagshaws Deli.
Well, I have seen at Wagshaws, members, for example, of the Obama cabinet that live in the neighborhood, and also queue up, which is great instead of exercising their influence or power or whatever. It's very, very humbling and nice.
Senators and members of Congress in that shopping center.
Exactly. So Wagshaws, moving on to continue on that venue, and I did it on purpose. That's why I structured this order. The Washington Hebrew Synagogue on Mass Avenue.
Yeah, it's a beautiful with a very nice outdoor art. The actual address is on Macomb. It's in the southwest corner of what used to be McLean Gardens when John McLean and then his son Ned and Evelyn owned this large estate there, and most of the estate was converted to housing during World War II. We talked about that in our last session.
Right.
But anyway, this part of it was sold to the Washington Hebrew congregation, which, like Wagshaws, started off in downtown DC. It started off there. It's Washington's oldest Jewish congregation. It started in 1852.
Wow.
When a group of German-speaking immigrants met at a home on Pennsylvania Avenue, and then they successfully petitioned the Congress to grant them all the rights and privileges and immunities granted to Christian churches.
Right.
And so they had this status. They converted a church at 8th Street and I Street in 1863. The community, it was a growing congregation. They had some trouble along the way. There was a schism that developed once, and I thought this was kind of interesting.
Right, tell us about it. Yes.
Schism over religious reforms, including the use of English and German in the liturgy during the services. Conservative members didn't like use of the English, and then the last straw for these conservative members was when church went with organ. A musical organ was introduced in 1869. That just violated their sense of tradition. Now
it sort of equates to those that rebelled in the Christian religion against not it being in Latin.
Yeah, similar kind of thing. So 30 families left and formed an Orthodox congregation, but the Washington Hebrew congregation, which was a Reform Judaism, flourished, and eventually a lot of their members moved out of downtown Washington into the suburbs, and so they moved with them and established their new synagogue on Mass and Macomb there, Mass Ave and Macomb. They what did they build it in the 1950s? Harry Truman laid the cornerstone in 1952, and then Dwight Eisenhower in 1955 dedicated the temple. So they were well respected, and they're the largest Jewish congregation in the Washington D.C. area, about 2,400 families.
And they also have a school in Potomac, no?
Yeah, they have a religious school in Potomac, Maryland. So they're well known. And so the last thing, we'll get to the point now why you structured this.
Right, exactly.
The discrimination theme is going to come up again here. And we talked about the discrimination against African Americans. We talked about discrimination against Jews. In some of my stories, particularly about the AU Law School, I talk about discrimination against women, and how the founder of the AU Law School was established in order to provide legal training to women who otherwise couldn't get it.
Right.
The Washington Hebrew congregation has been the target of discrimination and well, let's face it, hatred, anti-Semitic hatred. It's been vandalized most recently in 2019.
I remember.
It was vandalized with anti-Semitic statements and profane language and drawings. And earlier, a year earlier, there was another despicable act when somebody called the Washington Hebrew congregation right after the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue had been the target of a mass shooting. And somebody had the hatred to call the Washington congregation, the Hebrew congregation, and to say, I'm so glad that 11 people died at that other temple, and I wanted you to know. I mean, what kind of a person says such a thing?
I don't know. I don't know.
It was one of 17 suspected anti-Semitic hate crimes in Washington in 2018. So you think in this century we're beyond that, but
no. Between Black Lives Matter, anti-Semitism, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I want to go back now to something that is, to me, very punctual to talk about, because we are in a pandemic. And when we talk about the convent of Bon Secours, we're talking about an order that was instrumental during the typhoid and influenza pandemics. I call them pandemics. They call them,
epidemics. Well, pandemics.
Right, and it's near and dear to me because I had an uncle and an aunt that died of influenza in 1918. So when I got to that part of your book, I thought we need to talk about.
And this is a good news story, This is it's the convent of Bon Secours, the good help, And these were good women. These were good people, doing so much good. So the convent, it's no longer a convent, but the building is the same. It's this beautiful buff brick Italianate structure. It's very similar to the firehouse, which is very close. They're built about the same time. It was built in 1928. The order of the Bon Secours originated in France, obviously, in 1824, with the mission of helping patients, whether they were wealthy and could pay for it, or indigent and couldn't. They helped everyone. They tended the wounded during the 1848 Revolution in France. They tended the wounded during the 1870 Franco-Prussian War. 11 years after that, the order established a beachhead in the United States in Baltimore, where they set up a hospital. And that hospital in Baltimore became the center of the American operation. It introduced the first daycare service in the United States, actually in the world, I think. And the first formal healthcare service and helping people in their own homes. And the daycare was very important because before this, if you were indigenous, if you were a woman and you had to work, you often had to put your children in orphanages for a while. You couldn't take care of them. Here was the place you could put your children in daycare.
Right.
There's so much admirable about the women of this order. They, as you said, they tended the people of Tenleytown and beyond during typhoid and influenza epidemics, which were periodic during American history.
Right.
But around about, after World War II, Americans started going to hospitals for their health care. And so there was less need for this religious order to provide the health care. So in the early 1960s, the sisters closed the convent on Yuma Street in Tenleytown. They still have other operations. They still have their Baltimore operation, their headquarters there. I've been in communication with them. They sold the convent to the French Rimbaud International School, and which held classes there until 1975. And then they sold it to another school, the Oakcrest School for Catholic Girls, until Oakcrest moved out to a new facility in Vienna, Virginia, and they sold it to the Yuma Study Center. The Yuma Study Center is a women's leadership organization. So I think it's kind of nice that the gender identity of the building has
been preserved,
maintained.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
A convent, to a school, to a women's leadership organization.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful structure, and you can see it if you're walking around town.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, thank you. Again, I'd like to remind our listeners, Spies, Bombs, and Beyond, a walking history of Washington, D.C.'s Tenleytown. It's available on Amazon. Come on, you got to read this. It's fabulous. And I hope this is the first of several books. So I want us all to encourage Mark to continue walking and bringing us all this very, very valuable information.
And send me suggestions. A lot of neighbors have, after they read my book, they say, "Did you know about such and such?" And then, so I'm collecting more information.
Perfect. I will, definitely. Thank you very much.
Okay, Adrian, thank you. Bye now.